Welcome to the NFL Insights podcast powered by Pinnacle. I'm your host, Eric Eager, alongside PFF data analyst Ben Brown to help guide you through the world of the NFL with week-to-week reflections and projections. But the first thing I want to talk about is Pinnacle Sports, where you can win a $10,000 bet and other great prizes on the big game by betting on the playoffs with Pinnacle's Big Bet. Just click the link in the description to learn more about this great contest. Ben, you and we went to Kansas City, a football pilgrimage to the great state of Missouri, during the college football playoffs. Then we went and saw the Chiefs, win a big game in Arrowhead, keep their number one seed chances alive against the Denver Broncos. I really enjoyed it. The week was capped off, unfortunately, of course, with the sad news of Damar Hamlin, having cardiac arrest on the field. He's currently in critical condition. Things seem to be trending the right way, but that game, of course, against Cincinnati and Buffalo was rightfully postponed. So we have a little bit of a cloudy situation in the AFC and the playoffs at large. But besides that, Ben, let's talk just about the football that was played in Week 17. What were your reflections on Week 17?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like you initially said, the Chiefs obviously very much in line to, potentially secure that number one overall seed. Like you said, like the pending information still to come with the Bills Bengals obviously is very much going to play a role in that. But I think, specifically when we're kind of evaluating the playoffs and betting and everything else, like who ends up with that number one seed in the AFC is going to be at such an advantage over the other teams that very clearly are, I would say in the same tier as them, the three teams sitting at the top of the AFC. So I think that's a pretty, probably the biggest takeaway. On top of that, like some teams in the NFC very much look like pretenders, I would say. Some teams maybe looked for real as well. We kind of have it, looking at like from PFF simulation perspective, there are definitely some teams that don't really have a lot to play for, I would say, as far as like playoff season and those sorts of things, specifically like the Giants locked into the 6th seed. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers 100% locked into the number 4 seed. And then, both the Vikings and the Cowboys as well, over 80% chance of staying in that seed that they're currently in as well. So I think from that perspective, there's teams that could very much, I would say, kind of rest as we move into week 18, whenever that actually ends up playing out. But the AFC is so tight and so convoluted and so complicated that, if you're looking for betting opportunities, I would say probably gravitate towards the NFC side. Because I think that's the one where we're going to understand a lot more about where these teams are lining up heading into week 18.
Yeah, for sure. And, just for, completion's sake, there are some of these markets, especially the AFC and then the Super Bowl champion, those markets are down because there is uncertainty associated with what is going to happen to the Week 17 game between Buffalo and Cincinnati. But let's just let's play in the waters that we know here. For the NFC Championship winner, the Philadelphia Eagles, who have not yet secured the 1 seed in the NFC, they're plus 202 to win the NFC. The San Francisco 49ers are plus 212, right, sort of nipping at their heels after a really close win against the Vegas Raiders in Vegas the other day. There's a little bit of a drop off. Then it goes to Dallas at plus 464. Tampa Bay, I think, kind of surprisingly to folks from where we're from in Minnesota, Tampa Bay has better odds than the Minnesota Vikings, plus 908. The Vikings there are plus 1060, followed really closely by the Green Bay Packers at plus 1079. And then from there, it's the Giants, Lions, and Seahawks all at 25 or 1 or worse. Ben, do you think that there's any value in this NFC Championship market here on Pinnacle?
I mean, I guess I probably shouldn't be surprising any listeners at this point in time, but just in looking at this and where teams are ranked and where teams are going to fall from a seeding perspective, and the fact that the Vikings are very much in line to face off against what I would consider to be probably the least scary team in the NFC playoff race, in the New York Giants, that might not be a spot where they're heavy favorites at home. But, if they win that game, there is a case to be made for them maybe beating a 49ers team if they do get a bad version of Brock Purdy and do get some of that good fortune that they've had to start the season. So them at, a little bit over 10 to 1 odds, plus 1060 or something on Pinnacle. Like if I'm looking for, a bet right now, I think that's probably the only one that I would consider to be maybe just a little bit a little bit longer than what it should be right now. So that's probably the only spot. Can you get on board with that though, given how abysmal they've looked at certain stretches, especially, as we're kind of trying to wrap up the regular season with them?
Well, I look at PFF, my old employer, that you look at their simulation, they have 11% chance to win the NFC. I think that's, that does, imply, some opportunity there. When you look at, what 11% ends up being, that I believe, you should be able to get some value there. I, I see a path, right? I don't think that there are great paths for the Minnesota Vikings to winning the NFC, but here's one. If you look at it there, if let's say things play out the way that they're supposed to, and you get Philadelphia beats the Giants this week, but the Giants finished 9-7. They're locked into the 6th seed, 9-7-1. Philadelphia gets the 1 seed, 49ers get the 2 seed, Vikings get the 3 seed. Bucks are already locked in at the 4 seed, Dallas 5, and then you get to let's say it's Seattle or Detroit or Green Bay. Let's say Green Bay. Okay. Well, in round 1, the Vikings have already beaten the Giants at home. It's not going to be easy, I don't think, but they could do that for sure. Dak is a kind of quarterback who has, and we've seen it before, a 3-interception game in him, right? So even though I think Dallas will be favored against Tampa on the road in week 1, they could get knocked off there. Then, and this is like the sticky wicket, Aaron Rodgers, coming out of, the only Super Bowl he's ever won has come from the lowest seed in the NFC back in 2010. If they go on the road and you get, a matchup between Brock Purdy and Aaron Rodgers, I know the rosters obviously matter to that as well, but Aaron Rodgers, let's say for the first time in his career, outduels San Francisco in the playoffs, then you reseed everything. Philadelphia gets Green Bay. And then the Vikings would end up getting Tampa Bay at home,
right?
And then then anything can happen, and then you have Green Bay against Philadelphia. We've already seen the outcome of that game, but it's hard to beat a team twice in 1 year. And then obviously, I think the Vikings would be favored at home against Tampa Bay in the playoffs. So that's the path. And so I don't mind a bet there, given that I think what we would make it. Is less than 10-1 or so. So I like that one a lot, Ben. And I think it's a good suggestion. And in fact, you're buying them obviously at their low point. And this team, the Vikings, have been doubted a lot this year, and I think for the most part the markets have been right about them. But in this case, I think it's a good bet.
Right, definitely. And I agree with you. And that's kind of, I think, needs to be approached. Like you said, the AFC definitely down right now. Tons of uncertainty. Make sure you're obviously monitoring like the specific book information of where you're at with some of those bets as well. Understanding of the cash of like win totals, division futures, and all those other things, because it is very interesting and chaotic times, I would say, from a sports betting perspective. So we'll see. What are you seeing here for week 18? I mean, obviously you touched a little bit on, your restore the word of the Detroit Lions, Seattle Seahawks. You didn't mention them, at least as far as like being opportunities from the NFC's perspective, but do you think there's a chance, that either one of those two teams gets in? And is it just not a fair enough price, I would say, to maybe lay something on them to get or to potentially win the NFC? Or is it just the fact that you kind of, even if they do get in, probably don't have a good enough shot to actually get through the NFC at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the Niners end up facing Detroit in the round 1 of the playoffs, it's just like, that Niners team has given, the Rams a ton of fits when Goff was their quarterback. I just look, the Lions are a wonderful story. I really hope they make the playoffs, because obviously we had futures on them at around 4-1 to do so. I don't think they're going to do anything once they get in the playoffs, but I'd love to see it happen. The Rams are a team. The Rams gave the Seahawks a game just a couple weeks ago, covered, did not end up winning, but very well gave the Seahawks a game there. The Rams also don't have a draft pick to play for. They gave that to Detroit. So, there's really no reason for them to rest people. So I think that there is a better than, puncher's chance that the Rams win. And then you go, and that Sunday night game, Detroit versus Green Bay, is truly for that 7th seed in the NFC. That would be wonderful. But I just don't see Detroit doing anything with that playoff spot. I don't see Seattle doing anything with that playoff spot either. I think we've already seen Seattle play the 49ers, and that's been a bloodbath both times. And
Right.
I don't think Seattle is uniquely suited to beat the Niners. Even if it is a third time, it is hard to beat a team 3 times in 1 year. But like, I don't think that applies to that particular game. So, let's talk about Week 18. Again, with the cloud of uncertainty, we don't know necessarily if they're actually going to play these games, or what they're going to do here about motivational factors associated with them. But for example, Ben, if they decide that Cincinnati Buffalo is a tie, then Bengals Ravens is no longer for the AFC North. The AFC North would go to Cincinnati. So just know that. And my advice would be, don't bet those games unless you have inside information about what is actually going to happen with the league vis-a-vis those games. So let's stick away from those though, and let's also stick away from games that really don't have any implications. Let's start with one that actually kind of does. The New York Jets going on the road to face the Miami Dolphins. I, being the holder of a Miami Dolphins under 8.5 wins ticket, I got a ton of flack from people on the internet halfway through the season when the Jets were 8-3 about how bad of a bet that was. Funny, we're now in a situation where the Dolphins are only minus 115 to beat the Jets at home in Week 17. It's going to be either Teddy Bridgewater or Skylar Thompson to play for the Dolphins. The Jets are going to go with Mike White again, it appears. Total on this game, 38. Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Mike White hype train hit a little bit of a skid row last week, but I think that's kind of who he is, right? That's the same scenario that we saw play out last year when he did get over the starting job, kind of had a couple decent games, and then very much, I would say, kind of fell apart at the end. So this is very much a matchup that it seems like Skylar Thompson's going to be in the fold and be that guy for the Miami Dolphins. I think Teddy Bridgewater, hand laceration, it is going to have difficulty, I would say, kind of playing through that injury. So very much this is going to come down to whatever quarterback probably honestly just minimize the mistakes and whose run game is actually successful enough, I would say, to break off enough chunk plays and win this one outright. But I think the Jets, given where they're at defensively and kind of how far ahead we have them from a rankings perspective and defense and coverage specifically, like I think it's going to be tough for a Skylar Thompson led defense to put up enough points in this matchup. So I do probably lean a little bit in the Jets direction. And I think that's probably the only spot that you can play given the uncertainty at the quarterback position right now.
Yeah, I would say, and I actually got this question from a friend earlier. If you are sitting on Dolphins under 9 or Dolphins under 8.5 and you do want to hedge, I do think, it just depends upon your personal preference. But in the case of the Dolphins-Jets game, you do want to probably wait until kick, because the Jets have taken money, week after week after week against, they've lost week after week after week. So take that for what it's worth. But the Jets took money against the Lions. The Jets took money against the Jaguars. The Jets took money, this past week against the Seahawks. They closed favored in that game on the road. And they've been taking money this week. It opened Dolphins in some spots at minus 140. Now in Pinnacle, you're at minus 115. You probably, if you're going to want to hedge that under bet with the Dolphins, you're probably going to want to wait until kick to do it. Which brings me to another bet, because, again, this is another one where if you're sitting on, a win total under for the Panthers, for example, I believe, the Panthers one is fine.
It's cashed,
and we said we weren't going to talk about Bills versus New England. New England's currently at 8. Their win total was 8.5. That's another one where, again, you want to wait until all the information about that game before you hedge, because you don't want to sit on a bad number in that game. So just wait on that one. Let's talk about a game that this does have playoff implications. It does also lean into one of our preseason win total bets. The Dallas Cowboys laying 5 on the road against the Washington Commanders. It's trending towards 6, minus 119 on 5. Commanders started 7-5. You thought, okay, if you have a 7.5 over for Washington or an alt 8.5 over, you were sitting pretty good. They went 0-1-1 combined against the Giants since then, which was your out. And then last week they went to Carson Wentz, and they could have only muster, nothing against really that Cleveland team, even as favorites at home. Is there any chance, now that Dallas is playing for something, that you end up cashing your Washington over 7.5 ticket.
Yeah, I mean, this is tough. Obviously, kudos to the schedule makers for making this one just a little bit difficult with putting the Giants and Eagles in the same matchup. But Giants have absolutely nothing to play for in that Eagles matchup. Spread, opened up at 13.5 all the way up to 14 now. So I think this is very much a spot where, the Cowboys could be up early, especially at halftime, and kind of be scoreboard watching. And maybe they realize that the Eagles game has kind of gotten so far out of hand that there's no real reason for them to actually be playing. They are going to be that 5 seed. Maybe that's the spot where we can get the Commanders to come through the back door here. So that would probably be the one hope. But it's very much a spot that I think, I don't want to touch any part of the Dallas Cowboys right now, especially given the lack of motivation that could develop here relatively quickly. So maybe you just want to double down on the Commanders if you have their over win total and maybe get something on, +6, +5.5. I think it's +5.5 at Pinnacle right now. That's probably the +5 actually. So it looks like Commanders are taking some money with the expectation that maybe the Cowboys aren't running their horses out, I would say, for all 4 quarters here coming up on Sunday.
Yeah, the Eagles are 14-point now. It's a cheap 14, but 14-point home favorites against the Giants. Jalen Hurts presumably playing. I was in Philadelphia the week they played at New York just a couple weeks ago, and they absolutely bludgeoned the Giants. The Giants with nothing to play for. So maybe Dallas sort of sees that. There is a situation, again, you and I have certain bets where, you could think about you could think about having, taking a position on Dallas, -245 or something to hedge with your Commanders win total. There's not going to be a great hedge there, right? And I'd have to do the math there. But if you really want to, take a position on Dallas in that game, and then the Dallas takes a lead and then calls out the dogs, you can get a good number on Washington to come back and kind of, get a position there. That's playing with fire a little bit, I think, too much for my blood, but that is a situation to consider. One other game I want to talk about with respect that really does matter here, and that is the Tennessee Titans. This is on Saturday. Tennessee going to Jacksonville. Jacksonville, who we talked about on this podcast. I'm going to tout this a little bit. We took not Tennessee to win the AFC South at 14-1 3 podcasts ago, because I told you this on air, Ben. The path for Jacksonville was pretty simple, and the Titans had a really tough schedule ahead of them. Right. The Titans have not won since. They start 7-3. They're now 7-9. The Jaguars have basically won all but their Detroit game since losing to Kansas City to fall to 3-7. They're 6.5 point favorites here, -277 on the money line, total 39.5. Juiced over. They are going to start Josh Dobbs for the Titans, which is a real big indictment on Malik Willis. What do you think about in this game, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I very much think the Jaguars are the correct side. Kind of like you said, though, we are probably pretty levered up on Jaguars futures right now. So I don't really think laying 6.5 points is probably the best spot or really getting in it good. But there is the discussion of hedging or trying to middle in this situation, right? Obviously, if you saw the tea leaves or listened to this podcast previously, you're looking at like a 14-1, Jaguars to win this division. Maybe you have some of that in the preseason as well, like we have, where you even have some Jaguars to make the playoffs, at the +400 number that was pretty consistently out there in preseason. But the question for me becomes like, do you want to try and middle this one, or do you want to try and hedge a little bit on the money line? And to be honest with you, it feels so strongly about the Jaguars that I actually am not really that interested in even looking at like a spread or even like an alt spread to +3.5 for the Tennessee Titans to maybe get some plus money or, a plus price opportunity like that. So I think like this is a spot where the Jaguars very clearly show that they are the best team in this division. So I really want no part of hedging or middling, even on some of those futures tickets, if that's going to be your approach from my perspective.
Yeah, last week they had nothing to play for against a Houston team that had taken Kansas City to overtime, that had taken Dallas down to the wire, had beat this Titans team.
Right.
And, the Jaguars beat them into submission. So I think the Jaguars are rolling right now. I wouldn't lay 6.5, but I would not hedge any futures you have on Jacksonville. You are holding a great ticket, and look, like you chalk it up to the game. I think in this case, if they end up losing outright, and in fact, they're so favored in this game that if it looks like early in that game that the Titans are doing great, you won't be getting the best of it, but you can, I think, like if the game goes Titans 7-0 early, or 14-0 early, you're still going to get decent prices on the Titans if you certainly want them live. So again, you're playing with fire a little bit there, reasoning that way, but I do not think the Titans are in any way a bet here to make. The last one that I want to talk about before we talk about Detroit Green Bay is going to be this Bucks team +5 on the road against the Falcons. The Falcons with nothing to play for but pride. They were 7-10 last year in the first year under Arthur Smith. They're 6-10 this year, trying to match at least their win total from a season ago. The Bucks have nothing to play for. They can't move up to 3. They can't move back anywhere from 4. They did clinch that division coming from behind 14-0. I do wonder, this thing started at 7.5, I believe, moved all the way down to 3.5. It's come to 5. The Bucks are a bad football team when they're not behind by 14 points. My friend Rob Pizzola, who I do some work with a Hammer, said he told his wife when they got down 14, he was holding a Carolina ticket. He's like, "Look, this ticket's screwed," because the Bucks only come alive when they're down in a game where they literally have nothing to play for. I just don't see Byron Leftwich and company actually going about their business. So while this looks like a good number to get the Bucks at +5, I don't see it.
Right. I don't see it either. I very much think they are the most likely team, I would say, to rest. Obviously, they still do have some injury concerns, especially along the offensive line. If they lose Tom Brady, it's a complete disaster. So even if he does get some reps here, even for a quarter or something, I think this is very much a spot where they understand that they have nothing to play for and are very much going to approach it that way. My one concern with that mentality and a reason for maybe why you do want to wait is if we do end up pushing out a full week, and a lot of these teams do get that bye week already in place, that could impact some decision making as far as if teams are going to rest or not, or if they actually do need to rest or not, or if there's a concern of rust if they are going to have a multiple week time off window coming up here before the playoffs actually start. So maybe that's a reason to wait, but outside of that, I would say it's Falcons -4.5 or bust. One final time with the Falcons for the memories, I would say, or something like that.
Yeah, I would almost, this is just me talking, but I would just lay off that game. And by the way, Ben brought up a great point. If the games do move dates, you do have to check your books. Most books will void a bet if you make the bet and then the game changes dates, but you do have to check your book's rules just to make sure. So there's no Monday Night Football game, but there is a Sunday night game. And Ben, as somebody who has been on the Lions bandwagon all year, has said restore the roar. They start 1-6. They're got to 8-8. They've gone over their win total. They've gone over their alt win total. There's one more hurdle left for this Detroit Lions team, and that is to win this football game in Green Bay against the Packers to secure a winning record, to knock the Packers out of the playoffs, and to possibly, if Seattle loses to Los Angeles, secure a playoff spot, which got to 4-1 at some points during the offseason. Ben, this is interesting. I saw the stat. Goff has 23 touchdowns and 3 interceptions at home this year. He has just 6 touchdowns and 4 interceptions on the road. He has notoriously been bad in cold weather. He's been wonderful this year, though. And the Lions have run the football really well. Their offensive line has been great. The Packers, even though they have won 4 consecutive games, I still think are pretty soft defensively. This is a game where, even though Detroit's getting 5, and it's an expensive 5, plus 187 on the money line, total 49. I do think that look, the Lions are better than the Vikings. The Vikings are the 3rd best team in the NFC North. The Packers just got off of laying 3.5, 4 against the Vikings. Detroit's better than them. Why are we getting a full 5 here?
I mean, I think I have those teams a little bit closer than you do at this point in time. I think you have the Vikings with a very distant 3rd. I would say even after their most recent loss to the Detroit Lions, the Vikings are, I would say, at least in the same caliber, same boat as the Detroit Lions. So I don't know, man. I just don't see Aaron Rodgers losing this game at this point. I thought you could, for all intents and purposes, kind of bury the Green Bay Packers on their 2022 season a few weeks ago. Very much, was proven wrong by Aaron Rodgers here in this particular matchup. So I'm not really interested in laying -4.5 with them, but I'm also very concerned about what Rodgers is going to be able to do once again here on Sunday night. So I know it's probably the most intriguing game, especially if Seattle does end up losing here earlier on in the day. But it's still very much a spot where I would probably be waiting until we have confirmation that the Lions are playing for a playoff berth with a victory before probably locking in at either side of this bet.
Well, so that's the reason I brought this up, because I think, obviously the +5 is leaning in on this idea that the Seahawks are 6.5-point favorites, and the Rams are very likely to win that game. And then what does Detroit have to play for? But this team has covered all but one game, since they started 1-6. And what did they have to play for at 1-6? I do think that there's an aspect of them being underrated. There's two ways, in my opinion, to bet this, and there are plenty. And we've done this. We did really well on this, by the way, Ben, last year. And if we had done this podcast last week, in alternate weeks, we probably would have talked about this a little bit more than we did here. But there are some parlays that you can do that will help you a little bit, right? So if you do think that the narrative is that the Lions will lay down a little bit if they have nothing to play for, then you probably are getting value if you parlay Seattle money line with Green Bay money, right?
Yeah.
Like
I even spread, I guess, right? I mean,
but it's not even spread so much, but you could say, Seahawks money line and then Packers spread for a better payout for sure. That certainly is it, and you will probably get closing line value there, as you will get that number trending more towards Green Bay if Seattle does, in fact, take down the Rams. So that's a good point. So that's one, where those two things are correlated as well. Again, if you do get, Buffalo play, Buffalo, if you get that number reopened, if you do like, for example, Vegas, you could parlay Vegas money line with Buffalo money line, or Vegas money line with New England. If you think that the Chiefs go down to the Raiders, then all that Buffalo has to do is win one of the next two games, assuming they play a Week 19 game as a makeup. Again, there are these different outcomes that are correlated with each other. Not as many as some years, and would have been more, again, if we had a Week 17 podcast. You could have done some scenario building, much like we did last year. I think last year, for example, with Green Bay, it was Green Bay at home against Minnesota, and then Detroit against Green Bay the next week, and that one hit because Green Bay beats Minnesota. Then they have nothing to play for in Week 18. They lay down in the second half. Detroit wins. That was a combination there that really worked out for folks in Week 17 and 18. But those are just things to consider and to cook up for what will be a great Week 18. Again, plenty to play for the Eagles, plenty to play for the Niners, as well as possibly the Cowboys and possibly the Detroit Lions and Green Bay Packers on Sunday Night Football, among others. Let's do one more discussion of a game, because we had we were on the road. We got to see both college football playoff games. They were both barn burners. They were both a lot of fun. Right. I don't think we were on either side of any of the winners, though, because we like both favorites in both games. So that wasn't very fun. We have two games, though. One on Sunday, January 8th. North Dakota State goes to South Dakota State for the FCS title. North Dakota State, winners of many college football FCS titles against South Dakota State. North Dakota State, though, is the underdog in this one, +5. They do have a few players injured, and that number has trended away from them. It's open at 3.5. It's moved out to 5. Total on the game, 47.5. This is in Frisco, Texas, Ben. I'm inclined to take North Dakota State, the underdog, the team that's been there before. But you would be going against market resistance here in Frisco, Texas.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're definitely the FCS expert more so than I am at this point. I'm not completely up to speed with the North Dakota State injury situation, but I think if you do want that side, waiting until closer to game time is probably going to be the most, the best opportunity. You are going to get the best number at that point, especially if you have seen some early market resistance to that. So that may be a reason, probably the only reason to wait and take the Bison, on Sunday, basically, or sorry, on Saturday, basically, instead of locking that in right now. But I would probably definitely defer to you to what you would actually probably think is the best side for that particular matchup as well.
Yeah, I would probably lean North Dakota State, but to your point, you probably can get +6 at close. So wait on it a little bit. I would have taken that at +3.5, to be honest with you. I think we make the game more like 2.5 on a neutral. So that's just something to consider. And then finally, for all the all the marbles, Monday, January 9th, we get this game earlier than we normally get it. Usually there are 2 weeks between, but we get just the 1 week between. TCU, surprise winners against Michigan last week. They're 13-point underdogs, of expensive 13 at minus 115 against Georgia. Total on the game 62, expensive towards the over at minus 115. Ben, I'm going to just lay it out there. I like under and I like TCU.
Yeah.
I just don't think Georgia offensively. I just don't think they're as explosive and as you know. But yeah, I just think TCU is gritty enough, and they're not going to win this football game, I don't think, but I think they're going to keep it close. I think they're going to muck it up. I think Georgia, I think Stetson Bennett makes enough mistakes where this thing stays close, much like the game against Ohio State. I think it's a lower scoring version of what we saw last week with TCU's game against Michigan. Michigan a better team, but TCU outbattles them, and Georgia winning by a hair against Ohio State. I just think it's going to be a lot more like last week, but maybe a little lower scoring affair.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think if we didn't have two games, the college football playoff games, like skyrocket over the total or whatever, and last week we probably have this number closer to like a 57.5, 58 number as well. So I do think there is value there on playing the under in this particular matchup. And if you do get the under, like TCU plus the points is very much probably the correct correlated side to that one as well. Like you said, I don't really believe in Georgia's defense being all that great, but I also don't really love their wide receiver unit, right? Like obviously they have Brock Bowers, very good tight end, but outside of him, they just have a number of guys that they spread the football along to, and no one really dominates. And they are relying on some big plays from guys that are only running a few routes, a game, and kind of, winning at the top of their routes over the defense. But I think that TCU is going to be able to kind of negate the explosive big chunk plays, especially through the pass game that Georgia very much needed, I would say, to emerge victorious in that college football playoff game. If that doesn't happen, the under is going to stay there basically all game. And I do think TCU is going to keep it close enough to maybe have a shot to win, if not come, heavily through the back door, I would say, towards the end of this game.
Yeah, exactly. And Max Duggan, a player that, look, if this game got out of hand, you could very well see him get through the back door and lose the game by 11 or so, or 10. And you win that bet anyway. You might not win the total if that was a game where you were under and they had to come through the back door to win a game that they were losing by margin. But again, that's an out that you have there as well. So this has been a lot of fun, Ben. I can't wait to get to the playoffs here. Like we said, this was a tough situation as far as the situation with Hamlin and Buffalo. We wish him and his family the very best, of course, and he is in our thoughts and prayers as well. But again, this was a very good podcast talking about the week 18 games, which we all anticipate will happen this weekend. So that was the NFL Insights podcast for another week. At Pinnacle Podcast on all platforms to follow and keep up to date on Pinnacle's latest shows, including the EPL Insights, and our upcoming Australian Open tennis show with tennis data analyst Dan Weston. Keep across Pinnacle.com's page for the latest betting insight, including Mark Taylor's Game of the Week, Pinnacle's weekly NFL predictions article, and NCAA college football predictions. See you next week as we preview the NFL playoffs. So for Eric Eager, at Eric Eager _ on Twitter, and Ben Brown at PFF _ Ben Brown, this has been the Pinnacle NFL Insights podcast. Odds are correct at the time of recording. Please gamble responsibly.